Who was the first human to discover gold? Part 2. The ancient cemetery was discovered near the Black Sea coast in what is now Bulgaria. At first, it looked like an ordinary prehistoric burial ground. There were no giant monuments, no written records, and no clues that something extraordinary was hidden beneath the soil. But archaeologists kept digging. As layer after layer of earth was carefully removed, small flashes of yellow began appearing in the darkness. Then came the first gold objects, and then another, and another. What had seemed like an ordinary cemetery was hiding something that would completely change our understanding of early human civilization. Hundreds of gold objects were discovered buried beside the dead. Necklaces, bracelets, beads, small ornaments, decorative pieces. Some were tiny enough to fit in the palm of a hand, while others were carefully shaped into elaborate objects. The craftsmanship was astonishing for a society that lived thousands of years before modern technology existed. This archaeological site became known as the Varna Necropolis, and its treasures were around 6,500 years old. The discovery was extraordinary because it showed that humans were working with gold far earlier than many researchers had previously expected. These people didn't have modern factories. They didn't have electric machines. They didn't have drills, computers, or industrial furnaces. Yet somehow, they had learned something extremely important about gold. They knew how to collect it. They knew how to shape it. They knew how to hammer it. And they understood that this strange yellow metal could be transformed into objects that looked completely different from ordinary stones. But the gold wasn't simply lying around in random piles. It had been deliberately placed inside graves. And that told archaeologists something even more important. Gold had meaning. It was no longer just a beautiful object someone had picked up beside a river. It had become part of human society. It could represent wealth. It could represent importance. And perhaps most importantly, it could represent power. Among the hundreds of graves at Varna, one burial was especially remarkable. Inside was the remains of a man surrounded by an enormous collection of gold objects. Archaeologists later estimated that the grave contained more than 6 kilograms of gold. Think about that for a moment. 6 kilograms of gold in a society that existed thousands of years before modern banking, mining companies, or metal factories. For the people living at that time, this wasn't simply a collection of shiny objects. It was a statement. The person buried there had clearly been extremely important. His grave contained objects that ordinary members of the community could not easily possess. The gold was arranged around him almost like a display of authority. Even after death, the burial seemed designed to communicate one powerful message. This person mattered, and that is one of the most fascinating things about the history of gold. Humans didn't invent its value overnight. Its value slowly developed. First, gold was simply something unusual. Then it became something beautiful. Then people learned that it could be shaped. And eventually, it became a symbol of status. At Varna, we can see that transformation happening thousands of years ago. But another question remained. Where did these people get so much gold? There were no enormous underground mines surrounding the cemetery. There were no modern mining machines removing tons of rock. So how could prehistoric communities collect enough gold to create hundreds of ornaments? The answer may have been flowing water. Gold is unusually heavy. When rocks containing gold are slowly broken down by weather, rain, and erosion, tiny pieces of the metal can be carried into streams and rivers. But because gold is so dense, it can eventually settle among sand and gravel. For ancient people, rivers were therefore like nature's own treasure hunters. The mountains did the hard work. Rain broke down the rocks. Rivers carried the fragments away, and humans simply had to notice the tiny flashes hiding among the stones. Imagine standing in a shallow, prehistoric river. The water is moving around your feet. You scoop up a handful of sand and gravel. Most of it looks completely ordinary. Gray stones, brown dirt, tiny pieces of rock. Then, suddenly, you see something different. A small yellow flash catches the sunlight. You pick it up. You wash away the mud. And there it is. Gold. For a prehistoric person, that discovery must have been extraordinary. At first, they probably had no idea how important the material would eventually become. They simply knew that it looked different. And unlike many other materials, gold had a remarkable property. It was soft enough to be shaped without immediately shattering. A piece of stone could crack, wood could split, bone could break, but gold could be hammered into extremely thin sheets. It could be bent, it could be cut, it could be shaped into small beads, and it could be polished until its surface reflected the light. Every experiment taught ancient craftsmen something new. They could take one small piece of metal and transform it into something completely different. A rough nugget could become a bead. Several beads could become a necklace. A thin sheet could become an ornament. A simple piece of gold could become a symbol that represented an entire family or community. This ability opened a completely new world of creativity. Over generations, craftsmen became more skilled. They learned how much force to use. They discovered better ways to shape the metal. They experimented with patterns, sizes, and designs. And slowly, gold began appearing in more and more important places. It was worn by leaders. It was placed inside graves. It was used for decoration. It became part of ceremonies. And it began separating people by social status. A person who possessed gold could appear more powerful than someone who had none. This changed the meaning of wealth. Before gold, people could measure wealth through things they needed for survival: food, animals, land, tools, shelter. But gold was different. You couldn't eat it. It couldn't grow crops. It couldn't protect you from the cold. And yet people wanted it. Why? Because gold had become a symbol. It showed that its owner possessed something rare. And if something was rare, people could use it to demonstrate importance. This idea would eventually spread far beyond the communities around the Black Sea. As civilizations grew, gold became increasingly connected with rulers, temples, religion, trade, and power. Thousands of years later, Egyptian pharaohs would surround themselves with gold. Mesopotamian rulers would use precious metals to display their authority. Ancient civilizations across different parts of the world would develop their own traditions surrounding gold. But the story began much earlier, long before giant pyramids, long before famous kings, long before written history. It began with ordinary people noticing something unusual in nature: a tiny golden flash in a river, a strange metal that didn't rust, a material that could be shaped without breaking, and a human being curious enough to pick it up. That simple moment may have started one of the longest relationships between humans and a natural material in history. But there was still a mystery. It began with ordinary people noticing something unusual in nature: a tiny golden flash in a river, a strange metal that didn't rust, a material that could be shaped without breaking, and a human being curious enough to pick it up. That simple moment may have started one of the longest relationships between humans and a natural material in history. But there was still a mystery. If people at Varna were already creating sophisticated gold objects around 6,500 years ago, were they truly the first? Or had humans been collecting and using gold even earlier? And if gold was already a symbol of power at Varna, what happened next? How did a simple river discovery become the foundation for the golden treasures of kings, temples, and entire civilizations? The answers would lead us far beyond the Black Sea. They would take us toward the world's earliest cities, powerful rulers, enormous temples, and civilizations that would transform gold from a beautiful metal into one of the most powerful symbols humanity had ever created. And the most surprising part? The first person who discovered gold probably never imagined any of this. They may have simply picked up a strange yellow stone from a river and changed human history forever.